Gaza.
Every couple of years, Hamas fights a war against Israel in Gaza, leading to hundreds of deaths. This makes the international news and it leads to an uproar until a ceasefire is eventually signed and things quieten down for a couple of months. How did the situation get like this? Let's find out.
Gaza, airstrikes, rockets.
The Gaza Strip is a territory on the Mediterranean Sea bordering Egypt and Israel. Measuring 51 kilometers long and 11 kilometers wide, it has a population of approximately 2 million, mostly Muslim Arab Palestinians. Today, Gaza is ruled by the Islamic Palestinian militant group Hamas. Gaza was an ancient port city that is mentioned in Egyptian and Assyrian records and features in the Bible as one of the Philistine strongholds before the Israelite conquest. Like the rest of this land, Gaza has changed hands numerous times. It was governed by the kingdom of ancient Israel, Babylonians, Romans, and Arab empires. During the early 20th century, Gaza was an important trading hub with a mixed Jewish, Christian, and Muslim population, and contained a number of prominent synagogues and churches. Following World War I, the city fell under colonial British rule, along with the rest of modern-day Israel. In what became known as the 1929 Palestine riots, wide-scale attacks took place against the Jewish community as Arabs revolted against land purchases by Jews and Jewish access to the Western Wall prayer site. In total, Arab rioters killed 240 Jews, injured thousands, and destroyed scores of properties. In order to quell the tensions and ostensibly for their own safety, the British evacuated all Jews from Gaza along with 17 other Jewish communities throughout the Holy Land. Following this event, some Jews returned, established a number of agricultural towns in the Strip, such as Kfar Darom. Under the 1947 United Nations Partition Plan, Gaza was to become part of an Arab state. After the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, war broke out when all neighboring Arab countries attacked the Jewish state. Egypt conquered Gaza and proceeded northward towards major Jewish population centers such as Tel Aviv. Israel repelled the attack, and by war's end, a ceasefire was signed, with Gaza City and the surrounding areas coming under Egyptian control. Due to the war, thousands of Jews were dispossessed from their homes in the Gaza region and other areas, and were resettled in the newly formed Jewish state of Israel. At the same time, thousands of Arabs had to resettle from what became Israel to Gaza. At war's end, temporary borders of the Gaza Strip were marked out as part of the 1949 Egyptian-Israeli ceasefire agreement. These same ceasefire borders became the internationally recognized borders that we have today. Between 1948 and 1967, Gaza was occupied by Egypt, who used it as a front to launch terror attacks against Jewish villages across the border. During this time, Egypt, like most Arab countries, refused to grant citizenship to the Arab Palestinians living under its control. In 1967, Egypt amassed its military on the border with Israel and blockaded the Straits of Tiran, cutting off Israeli shipping. In response, Israel launched a preemptive attack on Egypt, initiating what is known as the Six-Day War, during which it captured the Gaza Strip along with the Sinai Peninsula. Following the Six-Day War, a number of Jewish towns were re-established in the Strip and reached a peak population of 8,000. In 1978, Egypt and Israel signed a historic peace agreement whereby Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt but maintained control of Gaza. Jews and Muslims in Gaza coexisted for more than a decade, with thousands of Gazans traveling freely into Israel for work, leisure, healthcare, and other services. Under Israeli control, Gaza's Arab population boomed, from 350,000 in 1967 to 2 million today. In the 80s and 90s, tensions between Jews and Arabs intensified. Following a number of terrorist attacks against Israelis, it became increasingly dangerous for Jews to visit Gaza City, although Gazans continued to work in Israel and in the Jewish towns of the Gaza Strip. In the 1990s, Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization negotiated the Oslo Accords, in which Israel agreed to hand over 80% of the Gaza Strip to full Arab Palestinian control. However, after further violence against Israeli Jews culminating in the Second Intifada, Israel imposed stricter security measures and engaged in frequent anti-terror operations to prevent attacks against IDF soldiers and Jews living in the Gaza settlements. 2005 was a watershed moment. Israel decided to disengage from the Strip entirely, remove all Jewish residents, and hand over complete control of the Strip to the Palestinians. Even though 15% of Israel's agricultural output came from Gaza, and despite massive opposition from Jewish civil society groups, Israel took this painful step in pursuit of peace at a cost of nearly $1 billion. Since then, no Jews have been allowed to live, work, or even visit Gaza. In 2006, Palestinians held their first elections in 10 years, with Hamas beating out rival election Fatah. Hamas is a branch of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood movement and is designated as a terror organization by the US, Canada, and European Union. Its ideology is to replace Israel with an Islamic State. Fatah is a Palestinian militant group that was previously designated as a terror organization by a number of countries, including the US. Up until that point, Fatah controlled the Palestinian areas in the West Bank and Gaza, and following the election it refused to relinquish control to Hamas. A civil war between Hamas and Fatah erupted, in which up to 600 Palestinians were killed in internal infighting. Hamas defeated Fatah and took control of the Strip, imposing a strict Islamic form of governance on the residents, such as female modesty laws, bans on alcohol, along with arbitrary arrests, crackdowns on free speech and dissent, and executions. As a result, minority groups such as Gaza's Christian population have dwindled, as communities are faced with harassment and forced conversions. During this time, Hamas siphoned off international aid money earmarked for hospitals and schools to its own leaders and for purchasing arms to attack Israel. The same year of its takeover of the Gaza Strip, Hamas began firing rockets into Israel on an industrial scale and kidnapped an Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, smuggling him into Gaza. To halt the incessant rocket fire and cross-border attacks, Israel fought a number of wars with Hamas, every 2 to 3 years on average. Meanwhile, Hamas rocket fire has penetrated deeper into Israel, threatening millions of citizens and endangering the country's international airport near Tel Aviv. Most of these rockets are fired from densely populated areas in Gaza in a cynical attempt to maximize collateral damage if Israel chooses to respond. In addition, the Palestinian group has built an elaborate network of attack tunnels into Israeli territory using international aid money, with a stated aim of kidnapping more soldiers and killing Israeli civilians living in border towns. Today, Gaza's population is estimated at 2 million. Most of its residents live in squalid conditions and experience power shortages, food insecurity, crumbling infrastructure, and high levels of unemployment. Most residents of Gaza have Palestinian travel documents, and while they can travel through the border with Egypt, this isn't always possible. A handful of Gazans, mostly those connected to Hamas, live lavish lifestyles insulated from the poverty around them and are hosted by Qatari, Iranian, and Turkish governments. No elections have been held since 2006, and Hamas clamps down violently on any dissent. It ensures that popular anger and frustration are channeled towards Israel, for example, by encouraging Palestinian youth to approach the border fence with Israel and attack Israeli soldiers. Israel maintains a blockade of the Strip to prevent Hamas from acquiring weapons, attack tunnels, although it continues to allow the transfer of thousands of tons of food, medical and construction equipment daily, and allows residents of Gaza to enter the Jewish state to seek medical care. Israel also provides the Gaza Strip with most of its electricity. Gaza's other international border is with Egypt, which is more porous and is used to smuggle weapons. While Hamas is primarily financed by the state of Qatar, much of its military support comes from Iran and Turkey, and it receives economic assistance from NGOs based in Europe and the United States, even though most Western countries blacklist it as a terror organization. Israel has shown willingness to engage with international efforts to rehabilitate Gaza, but not while Hamas remains in control. Although Israel has the military capability to defeat Hamas, it is hesitant to do so because of the massive cost of life involved and because it doesn't want to control the lives of the 2 million Palestinians living in the Strip. This has led to an uneasy and sometimes explosive status quo whereby Israel and Hamas fight periodic wars every couple of years, leading to hundreds of deaths, but to no change to the reality on the ground.
The real war between Israel and Hamas is not happening on the ground. It's happening right here, on this screen, on social media, in the marketplace of ideas. It's the battle for public opinion. Hamas feeds off this media coverage, which translates into the sympathy of well-meaning people who provide it with charity and international aid. This aid is used by the group to produce bombs, purchase weapons, build attack tunnels, and support the extravagant lifestyle of its leaders. The story of Gaza is tragic for both sides. for the people of Gaza, who for the last 15 years have had to live under an oppressive regime in subhuman conditions, and for the people of Israel, who have had to endure daily missile and rocket attacks on schools, hospitals, and kindergartens. While under Hamas rule in its current form, the Gaza-Israel conflict is intractable, and it's only a matter of time until the next round of fighting appears on your TV screen again.